Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this session of our Islam Study Circle. The Quranic verses that we are going to study today have been selected from Surah Furqan. To be precise, these are verses 63 and 65. I'll read out the verses before you. وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما والذين يبيتون لربهم سجدا وقياما والذين يقولون ربنا اصرف عنا عذاب جهنم إن عذابها كان غراما. And the servants of the merciful are those who walk humbly on the earth, and when people overcome with frenzy converse with them, they say peace. And they are those who spend their nights before their Lord, prostrating and standing, and are ones who keep praying, Our Lord, protect us from the punishment of hell. Indeed, its punishment is ever clinging. So, viewers, you can see that these verses of Surah Furqan spell out some of the outstanding qualities of believers, of Muslims, which they should have. And the one which stands out is humility. You can see the verses start off with the words وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, which of course means that when they walk on earth, whenever they walk as humble servants of God. They do not have an arrogant gait. They do not walk as if they are the kings or the queens. They walk as if they are people who know their place in this universe, who know who they are, who recognize their status, and they do not brag themselves. They do not show off, and instead of showing arrogance and haughtiness, they are ones who show humility. They are down to earth, and therefore the words which say so these verses actually signal وَعِبَادُ the exact words are وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And the servants of the merciful are those who walk humbly on the earth, and when people overcome with frenzy converse with them, they say peace. And they are those who spend their nights before their Lord, prostrating and standing, and are ones who keep praying, O Lord, our Lord, protect us from the punishment of hell. Indeed, its punishment is ever clinging. So, as just described earlier, these are some of the outstanding and some of the very coveted attributes of believers. And the foremost among them is that when they talk with people, they actually are ones who they are ones who are actually, they don't talk in frenzy. They do not talk as if they are the final words in this regard. So people when in frenzy, when they talk with them, remember in Arabic the word jahil is not the same as it is used in Urdu. In Urdu the word jahil actually means a person who is ignorant. In Arabic it has another overtone as well, and that is a person who is overcome with frenzy. So here the meaning of a person who is in a frenzied state, he has been overcome with emotions. When they talk to such people, so instead of engaging with them, instead of talking back with them, they just leave their presence, because they know that to talk to such people, to converse to such people, and to talk back is not something particularly pleasing, and of course it is counterproductive. So instead of engaging themselves with people and talking back to them, they just leave the presence of such people who are overcome with emotions, of course, because when a person is overcome with emotions, we clearly know it becomes impossible to communicate with that person. It literally becomes out of it goes out of our hands to talk to him or her in a way in which we can reason out ourselves. So remember, people with whom we reason out are the ones with whom we can really talk. But what about people who are in an emotional state, who are very angry or who are very enthusiastic? Then they, of course, cannot be conversed to. And this is what the Quran tells us, that when you face such people, instead of engaging with them, instead of conversing with them, just leave their presence and just say your salam and walk away. And then you see these verses have some other messages as well for us believers. It says that believers are those وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا. That believers are those who spend their nights before their Lord, prostrating and standing. This, of course, refers to the tahajjud prayer, to the night prayer. We know that the tahajjud prayer is the most rewarding prayer. It is the most coveted prayer after all the obligatory ones. So this is the prayer in which you have to break your sleep and get up at night and face the Almighty and talk to Him and listen to Him. And it's like a conversation that you start with God. And it is here that we are urged, not only here but at many places in the Quran, that if we are able to get up in the last part of the night, if we are able to talk to such people, to the Almighty in this situation, then this is something which really blesses us. The Almighty is the most attentive on this occasion, as we have been told, that He listens to our supplications, He listens to our invocations. And then it says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. So they are those, again, you see the attributes of people who are believers, who fear God. They are being spelled out here. So the words are that they are the ones who keep praying, who keep supplicating. And what do they say? Our Lord, protect us from the punishment of hell. Indeed, its punishment is ever clinging. So the biggest motivation for getting up at night for them is that they ask for God's forgiveness for whatever they might have done bad. Because you see, as human beings, at times we do realize the wrongs that we do, and many a time we don't realize the wrongs that we do. And all such excuse me, wrongs are ones that for which we ask for forgiveness at night. And the biggest thing is that, Lord, save us from hellfire, grant us paradise, make us people of paradise, make us think of that paradise which you have made for us, and forgive our sins, whether we have done them openly or in secret. Forgive our sins, whether they are small or big. Of course, we know that sins which relate to people, they will only be forgiven by the Almighty only and only when we ourselves will make amends for that. So we have to realize that as far as these Quranic verses are concerned, they provide an object lesson to us with regard to how we should behave, how we should conduct ourselves. Arrogance is the thing which actually is instrumental in bringing down all our good deeds to nothing. Because with arrogance comes this realization that if I am doing a good deed, I am doing it as a favor to the other person. Good deeds are not done by an arrogant person just to please God. Many a time they are done to show off and to actually tell people what better things and what good things we have done. So we have to show humility. We have to make a choice of conversation between people. When we see people indulging in debate and discussion and arguments, and they don't listen to the voice of reason, then the best thing is to disengage with such people and wait for a better time. And these verses, of course, tell us that not only are we to be humble on earth, when we walk, our own gait should be humble. Of course, if we extend this, our clothes should be humble, our conversation should be humble. Everything that we have should not be a means of show off. It should reflect humility. It should reflect our unassuming nature. And of course, the same humility is needed before the Almighty as well. And a person who is humble always asks for forgiveness. A person who is humble always looks at his or her own faults. He does not make a list of the faults of others. He is not concerned what others are doing. He is more concerned of what he is doing or she is doing. And that shows humility. That shows that spark in oneself, that we would like to improve ourselves. We are ones who would like to concentrate on our own shortcomings instead of making a list of shortcomings of other people. Because now we go on to the next part of our study circle, and this is the hadith of the day. This hadith has been taken from the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. It is narrated by An-Nawas ibn Sam'an, and the words are An Abihi and An-Nawas bin Sam'an al-Ansari قال سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن البر والإسم فقال البر حسن الخلق والإسم ما حاك في صدرك وكرهت أن يطلع عليه الناس. It's a beautiful narrative actually, which tells us how we have to conduct ourselves in life. So An-Nawas ibn Sam'an Ansari said, I asked God's messenger about virtue and vice. And he replied, virtue is good conduct, and vice is what pinches your heart and you would not like people to know about it. So in a few words, the Prophet of Islam has really got the whole issue in a single sentence by saying that virtue is something which is husnul khuluq, which is good character, which is your good conduct. You have to behave in a very, very compassionate and kind way towards people, and that's just a single expression which tells us what virtue is. And when he was asked that what is vice, look, his answer was not that you go and ask such and such a person or look up the Quran. He just said that if something pinches your heart and you would not like to disclose that to other people, then it means that thing is evil, that thing is bad. Your own conscience actually corroborates that thing, that it is not good, it is evil. So the biggest judge of right and wrong is our own conscience, is our own inner self. And the fact that we would like to hide that thing is also an indicator that we are people who would not like others to know about it. So virtue and vice are something which are well known to us. The Quran is actually very similarly said that فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, that the awareness of good and evil has been inspired by the Almighty within our own souls. We know what right and wrong are. So this hadith actually is nothing but what the Quran has already said, that the awareness of good and evil is found in our own selves. We don't need to go to any external agency to find out what good and evil are. At times, it does happen that good and evil get jumbled up, but again, it's just like reflecting and exercising more caution that one comes to realize what right and wrong are. So this is a very fundamental point that we need to understand, that if we have a living conscience, if we have a vibrant conscience, if we have a conscience which really gets that compunction, it gets that pinch whenever we do something evil, it tells us, it's like a barometer, it's like a red light found in our own souls, that something is not right, something is wrong. And people who have a strong God connection, people who have a strong connection with the book of God or the books of God, they always have not only this inclination to know what evil is and what good are, but they also have the urge to adopt goodness and to shun what vice is. And therefore we need to understand that it's basically setting our own house in order. If we have to overcome evil, it is our own self-effort. No one is going to come to us and tell us what evil is, or perhaps even if he does or she does, the task of overcoming evil, the task of conquering evil is something which is our own assignment. We have to do it our own selves. And it is here that we often talk and speak of that overcoming evil, overcoming vice should be one of our missions in life. It should be like a charter before us, and that we will overcome our shortcomings. We have to be high achievers as good human beings also. We are always after becoming high achievers as professionals. This is what comes very naturally to us. But let us also become high achievers in becoming good human beings. That is also a field, a sphere in which we have to strive. And the only way to do that is through self-correction. Only I can correct my own evils and my own bad habits. I have to get down to those bad habits. I have to make a list of those bad habits. I have to make a conscious effort to overcome those bad habits. These bad habits at times are not as bad, but they still do not contribute to your lives. For example, wasting time, procrastination, or wasting your resources, they also are habits which we cannot boast of and we have to overcome. And then there are serious bad habits, like, for example, lying, or showing bad temper towards your elders, or losing your temper, or treating other people with rudeness. All these things at times plague us, and we have to make a list of these things and see that where we are faltering. And the best way to do so is to hold ourselves accountable every night before going to sleep, the bad things that we did today, and make a fresh commitment to our own selves that when the next day dawns, inshallah, we will try better than the previous day, not to commit the same mistakes. Viewers, we now come to the next part of our study circle, and this is Bible. These are actually two verses of the Bible, taken from the Bible. This is the Gospel of St. Matthew, and it's basically, the words are, take care to do your works, take care not to do your works before men, to be seen by them, or you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And we have already discussed this many times. The word Father, the way it has been translated in the Bible, actually refers to God. And because He has this affection and care for His creatures, He is metaphorically referred to as Father. Otherwise, of course, it means God. When you give money to the poor, do not make a noise about it, as the false-hearted men do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may have glory from men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward. This is such a basic instruction and such a fundamental matter regarding spending our resources, our time, our skills for the cause of God, that they have to be purely for God. As these verses say, take care not to do your good works before men, to be seen by them. We must not do good merely to show off, merely for the sake of ostentatiousness, because that would mean that we are doing good not because we want to please God, but because we want to impress other people. And in the time of Jesus, this is what the Jews did a lot in synagogues, which were their temples actually, which were their worship places. So they would put on this show of kindness and compassion towards people, so that people could see and praise them. So Prophet Jesus has actually said that if this happens, then they've got their reward, because they wanted praise from people and they got it. But they're not going to get the reward from the Almighty, because pleasing the Almighty was never their intention. Their intention was to look good before others, to impress others. And it's a big test for all of those people who do virtue, for all of us, because you see, virtue always makes us or gives us this idea that we should disclose whatever good we have done towards others. And of course, there is also a time for such things, and a place and a manner in which they can be allowed. For example, at times you would like to teach your children, or maybe some other people, and on such occasions you spend in front of them so that they can develop this habit. So of course there are always exceptions, and a lot is also dependent on one's intention as well. But if the intention is to expressly please people, to show off your generosity, then this is something which is very unbecoming, and it shows that we have that arrogance in our own selves, and we would like ourselves to be praised by people, to be elevated in their eyes, and this of course is something which does not elevate us at all in the eyes of God. We have to be humble, we have to be very down to earth. Remember, if we are in a position to be generous, it is because the Almighty has blessed us with those resources and skills because of which we can show that generosity. We could have been very poor, we could have been poor as paupers are, and we could have been on the receiving end. So this is a blessing of God, and a blessing of God must not be flaunted. It must not be made such a show off, because something which has been given to us by the Almighty must be guarded, protected from these ailments. And remember, when we spend something in private, when we spend something without telling other people, the elevation it gives us, the spiritual fulfillment it gives us is unmatched, because you know that no one else knows except you and your God that you did something good. It's like not making tall claims of good you did. At times, it also takes the shape of not taking the credit of what you did and giving others that credit. Of course, that also is part of that humility, and that humility, which is part of that generosity also. So let us be generous, but let us hide that generosity. And also, I would like to point this out, that generosity is not merely in money. Generosity is a behavior. We have to be generous in accepting our faults. We have to be generous in acknowledging others. So generosity is a wider concept. We, of course, whatever the form, we must not show off generosity, but generosity is not merely through money. It is that large-heartedness in which you acknowledge other people, in which you encourage other people, in which you praise other people, and in which you downplay their faults. And generosity is also a trait in which you are accepting your own faults. You generously accept your own faults because you are serious in correcting them. So always think that generosity has a very wide connotation. It's much wider than it is generally thought of. We now go to the fourth part of our study circle, and this is the study topic of the day, or the discussion topic of the day. And the discussion topic of today is dating and friendship. So people often ask this question, that when we get married, or when young couples get married, they often see each other, they hang out with each other, they date one another, and what is wrong with dating and hanging out with one another? Because this is why, the reason that young couples do this is that they would like to know each other, and without knowing each other, this is of course something which will not evoke enough confidence in them to take a decision. Now, as far as meeting your future spouse is concerned, this is something of a very allowable nature. It's not prohibited at all. If you meet your would-be spouse or a proposal, the only thing which is recommended here is that you should meet perhaps in the presence of elders, so that your own reputation and your own stance and your own reputation does not go to stake, and it is not something which is compromised. But if this philosophy is extended to mean that unless you are good friends to one another, unless you meet each other, we are not able to take a decision, then we have to realize this fact that if we have this proclivity of friendship and dating with the opposite gender, it is something which becomes addictive. And even after marriage, even after maybe selecting a spouse, because this is something of a nature of an addiction, we are literally not able to give it up. If we have this proclivity towards making friends with the opposite gender before marriage, and the purpose of course is to find a good partner, and if we go to extremes in this, then it becomes such an addiction that even after marriage, this inclination does not die away. And in spite of having a spouse, we are still inclined to make friends from the opposite gender, and at times go to the other extreme. So the reason that we have been told by religion to put these things in a certain limit is that if we adopt friendship and dating as a habit towards the opposite gender, then it becomes such a addictive habit that it becomes a part of our own life, and even after marriage it does not go away. And of course this spells very bad for the marriage institution. It is something which is really detrimental for us, for the institution of marriage, because unless you are devoted to your spouse, you cannot engender a good family. You cannot become people who are really friends to one another, or really good spouses to one another. So although this friendship or this dating is, if it is within limits, for example, if it relates to people knowing each other in the presence of elders and having a limited conversation and limited exposure to each other, this is nothing wrong with it, because you should get to know each other. But it is only when it becomes a habit that you start to realize that it is so very bad for the family life, because family life is something which can only come into being, can only come into existence when both the spouses are devoted to one another and they do not look left and right. So viewers, with these few sessions, or these 4 segments, we come to an end to this study circle. And if you have any questions, please raise your hands. You can, and then I will just unmute your mics. So I'm going to unmute the mic of Ms. Rafia Khwaja. So please unmute your, yes, please go ahead.
The point you made about dating.
Kindly speak a little louder. We are not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
We are not being able to hear you. Please speak a little louder.
Can you hear me now?
We are just barely able to hear you.
Okay, let me see. Let me try. Is it better now?
Yes, slightly better.
Dr. Shehzad, I was wondering about this point you made about dating. Is it clearer now to you?
Yes, please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, the thing is that when you are dating and you're trying to select your spouse, then you select the spouse. You may be studying together in college, you get to know each other, and you get married.
Mm-hmm.
Then why would you start dating again? Like my daughters, they selected their spouses.
Mm-hmm.
They were college together or they met. But after marriage, they don't go around dating because they are married. So when you say that, if you meet each other and you get to know each other, it becomes an addiction. This has really puzzled me.
Right.
So maybe make me understand
Mm-hmm.
what.
So the thing that I was trying to say is that we have to take a precautionary measure in these things because if dating goes to extremes, so you see, if it is checked, if it is limited, of course, then it could be very productive. But what happens is that if you look at the Western culture in which dating becomes almost a habit and you even bear children before getting married, so what it does is that it creates in you a strong liking for the opposite gender, and you pick and choose and you leave one partner and go to the next without realizing that this is so harmful for the family. So what the point that I'm trying to make is that it's originally, if you know the history of dating, it started off with this term called courtship. Now, courtship or courting would mean that in the presence of a chaperone or in the presence of other people, couples or proposed couples would meet each other and discuss things with each other. That is something which is fairly allowed. The only thing is that when you make it a habit, that there is a chance that even after marriage, that habit does not go away. Of course, there are exceptions, and I'm sure your daughters are exceptions to that. But you see, this is something, if it is encouraged, it can really spell a lot of doom for the family. And when this is encouraged and when people do it without any inhibition, then there is this chance in which, because it's such a nature, it's such an attractive thing, it's such a thing which both genders espouse so much, that there is a very strong chance in which this still goes on after marriage. So it's not that it always is like that. It's like saying that when you drink a few drops of liquor, you don't get inebriated. Of course you don't. But because of the nature that when you do so, you can always go to extremes. Something of a precautionary nature has to be exercised. So it's like being extra precaution in matters of the family.
And I see Pakistani boys and girls are studying together at universities.
Right.
They get to know each other. Then they tell their parents, we like each other. The parents, the other side, and they agree, and then they get married. So maybe I'm making a mistake, but I've generally not seen it in our Pakistani boys and girls that they would start dating again after marriage.
So you are lucky in that respect, because you see, what happens is that, as I said, I just gave you this example, that when you drink a couple of drops of liquor, of course, it doesn't harm you at all, and people can make this case that how about drinking a few drops of liquor, because I don't get inebriated by that, I don't get intoxicated. But because there is a chance that once you start these small things or consuming liquor in small amounts, there is always a chance of ending up with taking in it in large quantities. I also give this example very often that in areas where there is volcanic activity, people are not encouraged to make their houses there. Although the volcano might not have erupted for maybe 40, 50 years, but because of this fact that it can erupt, governments and states they don't allow people to settle there. So you see, it's this precautionary nature which is found in our own selves, in our own natures, that when we conduct ourselves, we are extra precautionary. We take extra precautions in areas where there is a chance that people will go astray. It's only in certain matters when we don't take those precautions, because we don't realize the loss that we incur if we don't take those precautions. If you look at a lot of broken families in many countries, there are, I'm sure, many other reasons. But one of the reasons is that spouses lose interest in themselves because of various other reasons. There are other reasons, but one of the reasons is because this friendship in them, or this propensity, this proclivity towards friendship, towards the opposite gender, ignites in them this flame to continue this friendship. I have seen extramarital relations, mostly by, I would say, by boys or by men, much more in Pakistani origin people. But if you look at other countries, if you look at other societies, it exists both in men and in women. So we are not talking just about Muslims. We are talking about a global community in which, if friendship is encouraged or dating is encouraged before marriage, then it does become a habit with us, because there is a natural attraction between the genders, and it is very difficult to do away with it. So it's like a precaution. And of course, at times, if you exercise discretion, precautions can always be overruled. But we have to understand why this precaution is actually being taken.
I understand it. Thank you. Can I ask another question? Dr. Shehzad, baby illegitimate. Of course, when the baby is adopted and he grows up, you tell them that you are adopted.
So I think if you have to revise your opinion a little, what he does say and what the Quran says is that you should disclose the name of the father as soon as the child goes up. But there is no harm in giving him any other name, or the child any other name. You can give your own name as well. The only thing is that you should not hide the identity of the biological father of that child. The problem is not that you cannot name him after yourself. Of course, you can give him any name. But as soon as he or she grows up, you have to disclose the identity of the biological father or mother, so that the child knows that he is an adopted child. That's all. It's not essential that the name should not be given. I mean, the name of the father, the adopted father, can be given. That's not the case. The only case is that you should not hide the identity of the original father. You see, we have to realize that all of us follow Islam. Even Christians and Jews, they are Muslims of their times, and Jews and Christians are just sects of Islam. So all of them do follow Islam. The only thing is that at times they deviate, just as Muslims do. So as long as a person obeys God, he does not deny any truth intentionally, he does good deeds, follows his conscience, he or she should hope to end up in paradise. I think that this is a universal principle, and it does not merely is not spelled out merely for Muslims. It's for every human being. Paradise is not for Muslims. Paradise is for any person who fears God, who does good deeds, and does not deny any truth intentionally. This is what the Quran says. Absolutely right. This is what the Quran says. So I have another question from Mr. Mushtaq Khan. I'm just going to unmute your mic, sir. Yeah, Ji, please go ahead.
To raise money for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever studied this thing, that what is the proper way? Because other professions are being supported by the government.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a profession that is being neglected by everybody.
Right.
And they are at the mercy of the people.
Right. So, in the time of the rightly guided caliphate, for example, in the time of Umar the Great, this was done by the state. He had actually appointed Quran teachers himself on behalf of the government, and he funded them so that people could teach and preach the Quran far and wide. This is unfortunate that today it no longer happens. Otherwise, in an Islamic state, the dissemination of the Quran and religion should be state sponsored, and they should contribute in hiring such teachers. And of course, if the private sector also comes along and helps and makes such arrangements in which people are hired so that they can do this duty, it's also commendable. But this education is also the responsibility of the state, and I hope it does get this realization that this is something they have to do. But in the absence of any state-sponsored teaching, we are left with no option but, for example, private institutions like the mosque, or maybe a school, or some other areas, some other people who would like to sponsor religious people. I have even seen religious people earning for themselves. I have seen them in real estate businesses. I have seen them in some other businesses in which they are earning and also at the same time doing their duty. So, of course, ideally this should be state sponsored, and the state machinery should work in a way that just as they do other things, as they hire professionals for other services in the public sector, they should do the same for Islamic teachers as well.
Way a person can dedicate himself or herself, and there will be a sport available through a university, college, or other institutions.
Right. So at the moment, the things are very bleak. It depends also on the country that you are in. But for example, if you have a good degree in Islamic studies, if you are in the West, you can perhaps be a very good teacher, and it's a highly paid job as well. But if you are in a third world country like India or Pakistan, or maybe some countries of similar sort, then the choices are very limited. For example, you can be maybe a person who is an imam in a mosque, or maybe he's a teacher, and it's also not very highly paid. So it also depends on the area that you are in. But we would strongly urge all Muslim scholars or people who would like to take scholarship, Muslim scholarship or Islamic scholarship as their profession, that they should have a good degree in Islamic studies, so that just as other professionals use that degree to earn, they can also use a degree. For example, if they hold a master's in Islamic studies or a doctorate in Islamic studies, they can teach in various institutions and earn a very respectable livelihood. So that is what they can do. And other than that, the government should also realize that they can hire such people, especially who are very competent, and pay them very, very well, so that they can do their duty without any inhibition and hesitation.
Maybe this confusion about different sectors and
Right. So this is right. Yes, absolutely right. Right. Absolutely right. So, if the funding is from a particular sort of people, they'd like their own agenda to be forwarded, and that's what creates more rifts and differences. So, it has to be from a neutral source so that religion can be taught in a neutral way. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end to this study session, study circle, inshallah. We'll see each other again next week at the same time. Until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.